It is said that there are places in the world where time itself moves differently, places where the wind seems to pause in mid-breath, and the dust remembers footsteps long vanished. In such a place, a wide and empty plain washed with pale ash, there once drifted a procession of lights, lanterns, small, trembling amber flames gliding just above the earth as though held aloft by invisible hands. Some believe they floated entirely on their own, carried not by mortal bodies, but by the wills of those who walked before memory learned its shape. Others whispered that a brotherhood moved beneath them. Men robed in twilight cloth, their bare feet soundless on the soft and wind-hewn ground. They spoke no words. They left no marks. And when they passed, the night closed behind them like a curtain drawn across a stage no eye was meant to see. History does not record their names. No kingdom claims them. No chronicle sings of their deeds. But the plain remembers. It always remembers. For it was across this place, beneath a sky unbroken by cloud, that the brotherhood walked, mapping the heavens not as chance would scatter stars, but as a message meant to be read by those who dared to lift their eyes beyond the domain of dawn and dusk. And so, in the stillness before daylight touches the horizon, we follow them. Or rather, we follow one imagined soul among them, a young acolyte moving beneath the trembling lantern glow, his face unseen, his breath quiet, his purpose felt more than understood. The night above him is clear, so clear that the stars seem close enough to touch. Each one hangs like a droplet of silver suspended in ink, a shimmering word in a language the sky has spoken since the first light was born. The brotherhood believed, or perhaps simply hoped, that the heavens spoke of things ungraspable by mortal hands. Not prophecy, nor direction, but memory. A record not of what will be, but of all that has been forgotten. They walked in wide circles, in spirals, in gentle arcs, so broad and deliberate that only the stars above could comprehend their shape. From high overhead, their path must have appeared like a slow-moving sigil drawn upon the earth's surface in lines of devotion. It is said the acolyte traced his steps with care, his lantern hovering before him like a star guiding a pilgrim. With each breath, he watched the celestial canopy shift and whisper. And though no voice reached his ears, the silence felt thick with meaning, as if the universe itself leaned close to listen. Some nights, the wind rose, not with force, but with a soft exhalation like a vast creature stirring in its sleep. Sand lifted from the ground and curled around the procession's feet, twisting like incense smoke in a temple unseen. When the wind grew strongest, the lanterns flared, as though fed by an unseen hand. They elongated, wavered, brightened, their frail flames reflecting pin-pricked constellations in their glass walls. If one listened carefully, as perhaps the acolyte did, the wind carried murmurs, the ghost of chance barely spoken. Many believed the brotherhood prayed as they walked. Their liturgies offered not to earth-bound monarchs, but to unseen kings, whose crowns lay set among the stars. Kings who governed not empires of soil and stone, but the realm of breath, memory, and wonder. A dominion held not against swords or laws, but against forgetting. These kings, so legend drifts, ruled long before mortals first pressed their palms into wet clay and called it creation. They were said to be luminous beings, rooted neither in sky nor in flesh, but floating between realms like trails of starlight that refused to fade. And so the acolyte walked, lantern held before him, head tilted toward the sky, eyes wide with awe. To him, those unseen kings were less myth than certainty. For every glimmer overhead seemed to pulse with intention. Every star felt placed deliberately. Every gap between them thrummed with quiet promise. Some nights, meteors streaked across the vault, leaving trails like the brushstroke of an unseen artist. The acolyte lifted his lantern in reply, believing such falling stars were fragments of meaning descending to earth. Others said the Brotherhood sought to catch these pieces, not with baskets or nets, but with understanding. Each streak of light was a thread, each ember that faded into the horizon a syllable, each arc of flame a hint of the hidden language the sky used to speak to those willing to walk slowly through the dark. Time meant little to them. Their circuits might have taken hours or years. The desert kept no measure other than the whisper of wind through hollows and the shifting pattern of constellations scattered across the night. But lantern light cannot burn forever. As the first silver-grey breath of dawn rose along the eastern edge of the plain, the flames trembled. Their glow diminished. So slowly at first that the acolyte might have imagined the dying of the night was merely illusion. He paused, watching the horizon lighten, watching the stars retreat softly into morning's veil, like storytellers reluctant to end their tale. The sky turned lavender, then pale rose. Then the faintest gold spilled along the ground. And with each change of light, the lanterns waned. One by one, the drifting flames dimmed until their bodies became no more than faint red pulses clinging to the final shadows between grain and stone. Still the Brotherhood walked, silent, unhurried, accepting. They did not attempt to rekindle the light, nor did they mourn its passing, for they believed the lanterns did not perish, but merely returned their borrowed fire to the source from which all illumination springs. And so, as morning stretched its fingers across the earth, the desert plain fell quiet again. No footprints marked the sand. No robes brushed against the ground. No sign remained that anyone had passed at all. Only a single lantern lingered. It lay in the dust near where the acolyte last walked, its frame half buried, its wick still warm, its faint ember flickering like a heartbeat refusing to still. Some say the Brotherhood vanished into the sky, ascending beyond mortal sight once their earthly vigil was complete. Others believe they descended, not upward into the stars, but downward, into caverns beneath the crust of the world where forgotten knowledge pools like clear water waiting for the next thirsty pilgrim. A few speak of a third possibility, that they never left at all, that they simply shifted sideways into a realm where time curls inward, and the distance between breath and eternity grows thin as silk. Whatever truth belongs to them is shrouded now in silence. The lantern rests alone, its ember guttering in the hush before full daylight. And though no hand comes to claim it, the wick flares once, as if stirred by a passing thought, a farewell, or a promise yet unkept. Perhaps the lantern waits. Perhaps the Brotherhood will walk again when the world grows dark enough and souls grow curious enough to search the heavens for messages woven into starlit patterns. Perhaps the kings above will whisper once more, their breath falling as meteors onto plains where dust holds memory close. Or perhaps the lantern's light will fade completely, carried off not by flame, but by story, entering the hearts of those who listen and choose to wonder. For some voices echo only when the night is quiet. Some truths glow only before dawn arrives. And some journeys continue long after the walkers are gone. And if someday you find yourself beneath a clear sky with constellations pricking holes in the ink, dark air, you may notice a lantern flame gliding at the edge of vision just above the horizon. If you do, watch it closely for a moment before you close your eyes, for it might be the last light of a forgotten brotherhood still tracing circles upon the earth, gathering the breath of falling stars, mapping the hidden language of kings who once ruled the sky without ever touching the ground. And if it fades, know this: it may not be gone. It may simply be waiting for dawn to fall asleep, so that night may wake once more and carry its flame beyond the horizon of dreaming. In forgotten corners of the world, where mountain spines lift high enough to scratch the first breath of the dawn, it is said, the sky once bowed to a lineage of kings whose dominion reached not over soil and stone, but over breath, wind, and wonder. Our story begins at such a height. Imagine a path so narrow, so steep, that each footstep feels as though it is rising not just above the ground, but away from the world entirely. Mist clings to the trail like ancient cloth, folding itself across jagged bubble boulders and wind-carved ledges. The air is thin, crisp as cold water, yet somehow threaded with warmth, as though embers once glowed here long after the world forgot. And then, without warning, the path widens onto a summit, a place open to creation's breath, silent yet humming with memory. There, set against a sweeping sky, you see them, thrones, not built, but born from the very bones of the mountain, carved directly from stone with such reverence and precision that their surfaces, even now, reflect the pale silver of moonlight as though polished by hands long vanished. But the wonder does not lie in their shape, nor in the craftsmanship of their making, but in the direction they face. For these thrones, perhaps a dozen, perhaps more beneath the dust, do not look outward across valleys and villages, nor toward distant rivers, forests, or kingdoms. Each stone seat looks upward, tilted ever so slightly, as though awaiting a throne room made not of walls or ceilings, but of circling stars and drifting clouds. Whispers tell us that here high among the clouds, kings once gathered not to survey their subjects, but to greet the heavens themselves. They believed authority was not forged beneath banners, nor won with blade and blood, but bestowed by the sky, an inheritance granted from a realm beyond earth's touch. Some say these rulers held no armies, no coins stamped with their faces, no tablets marked by decrees, and instead, when night arrived, they sat upon these stone thrones and lifted their eyes toward constellations. Like students awaiting instruction, they listened. They listened for thunder rumbling through the mountain spine like a voice speaking from unimaginable distance. They watched clouds roll slow and heavy around the peaks, unfurling like celestial banners, bearing omens only they could read. It is said the clouds bowed for them, curling low to brush the edges of the thrones, wrapping the stone in ribbons of mist, as though offering veiled coronation robes. And when storms crowned the peaks with ice-bright lightning, the kings did not cower. They closed their eyes and let the breath of wind settle against their brows, accepting the unseen coronet placed by forces older than kingdoms and names. Far below, villagers murmured of these sovereigns, their stories growing stranger the further they drifted from truth. Some believe the kings commanded thunder and called rain from blue skies or chased away droughts with a single raised hand. Others claimed they never descended at all, that they were more spirit than flesh, guardians of the thin line between earth and the heavens. But the mountains tell quieter tales. For beneath those wind-polished summits lie halls hollowed out by patient chisel and devotion. Rooms chiseled into the rock not for pomp, but for stillness. Long chambers cool and resonant, lined with smooth pillars that bear no inscription. No names, no records, no seals of royal houses. Only silence. A silence that is not empty, but full. As though every wall remembers the sound of voices chanting in twilight, or the echo of footsteps approaching the sacred seats above. In one chamber, stone alcoves curve anew upward, like cupped hands holding torches that no longer burn. Blackened soot marks remain, pinned in place by centuries of wind and sleep. In another, a circular room sits beneath a shaft, cut into the rock that opens directly to the sky. When the moon is full, its light falls like a beam of silver truth right to the center of the floor. It is easy, so easy, to imagine a figure seated cross-legged beneath that celestial glow, eyes half closed, lips moving in a prayer long lost to breath. Who were these kings? The oldest fragments of oral tradition suggest they arose during an age when people believed that the heavens were not separate from the world, but intimately intertwined with it. A time when kingdoms stretched not outward across plains, but upward toward meaning. When rulers were chosen not by inheritance nor by strength, but by those who could read the sky as others read scrolls. Some believe the thrones were meant for stargazers, leaders who charted constellations to guide the fate of all who lived below. Others whisper of mystics who claim to trace the very breath of creation through shifting wind currents and drifting cloud forms. And a few, in hushed, uncertain tones, speak of rulers who once walked among the stars themselves, returning to earth only to share what wisdom they found beyond the veil of night. None of these tales can be proven, but each feels like a thread in a tapestry woven from wonder. Yet history, ever hungry, swallows even the brightest stories with time. No chroniclers journeyed to these heights. No stone tablets record their ascent. No scribes etched their titles on clay or velvet bindings. The thrones sit empty. Wind fills the chambers with sighs. Clouds drift lazily across their surfaces. And the ridge where kings once gathered stands untouched but for the occasional wildflower clinging to cracks left by centuries of frost. Then, after ages of silence, a handful of travelers found their way up the forgotten path. They arrived breathless, astonished, feet trembling against ancient steps. One traveler, unnamed in the fragments of record we possess, wrote that he felt as though the air itself was watching him. He approached the thrones hesitantly, reverently, as though stepping into a hall where dignitaries might still be seated, invisible to mortal eyes. He brushed dust from a carved armrest and felt cool stone beneath, smooth like river-polished bone. He said he felt something, a twinge like a memory that did not belong to him, a sensation that birds, clouds, and distant storms still bowed toward this place, a quiet homage to rulers who had simply ceased to be seen. Standing there now, imagine yourself the traveler. The mountain winds tug your cloak, and silence presses against your ears with the weight of ages. You see the thrones, some intact, others broken at the edges where frost has gnawed. You run your hand across stone and feel it bite your skin with cold. You tilt your head back and find the sky impossibly vast, a living cathedral of breath and shadow. Perhaps you wonder, did the kings ascend, lifted skyward on wind and lightning until their bodies dissolved into pure radiance? Or did they fall into the depths of secrecy and rock, retreating into caverns where only stars carved into ceiling stone remain to whisper their names? Or, as some of the oldest voices murmur, did they simply tire of being seen, slipping away into clouds whenever mortals dared to climb too high? No answer arrives. Only wind, only silence, only the thrones, smooth as moon-pale marble, waiting without expectation, waiting, perhaps, for a night when the stars rearranged themselves back into the language they once spoke, waiting for a breath of recognition, waiting for ears ready to listen. And so the chapter closes not with certainty, but with stillness, a reminder that some powers are not recorded, but remembered in bones and air. That some kings rule still, not from lands or armies, but from the echo of their presence high above the world. That sovereignty, once granted from the sky, does not vanish. It drifts. Where memory fades, it slips into cloud, into wind, into the hush between thunderclaps. Someone, someday, may climb again and find the thrones no longer empty. Or perhaps they were never empty at all, merely unseen. And as dreams take hold, you may feel, softly, gently, that there are realms above us still draped in ceremony, still humming with silent coronations, still lit by stars that wait for watchers. For some voices only echo when the night is deep enough and the listener is ready to hear. It is said that beyond the last remembered caravan route, beyond dunes that shift like slow-breathing animals in their sleep, there once stood a city built not for the sun, but for the stars. You might imagine it first as a shimmer on the horizon, a pale mirage where the desert ripples under a veil of night. But as you draw nearer, the mirage does not vanish. It clarifies. Walls of sandstone and alabaster rise from the sea of darkened sand, their faces inlaid with crushed gemstones, not arranged in proud patterns for daylight eyes, but scattered like fragments of fallen constellations set carefully into mortar and stone. By day, they are almost modest, glinting only faintly in the harsh light. But under the cloak of night, when the moon climbs low and the stars awaken one by one, those walls begin to glow, quietly, reverently, as if answering some far-off call from the depths of the sky. Whispers tell us that this city was never truly awake in the daytime. Its heart beats slowly in the heat, waiting, always waiting, for darkness to return. For this was the city that waited for comets. In forgotten corners of old stories, our elders speak of it with a kind of gentle awe. They say its builders were people who believed that the greatest moments of history did not unfold on battlefields or in throne rooms, but in the rare burning passages of drifting ice and stone that crossed heaven's vast face once in a century. Every 100 years, when a streak of fire was foretold across the sky, the city grew very still. Preparation began long before the appointed night. Streets were swept of sand until the stones beneath shone pale and smooth. Fountains, usually animated with soft, bubbling voice, were stilled until the water lay flat as polished glass, reflecting only the sky. Scrolls were brought out of deep, cool chambers, their edges frayed, their ink faded, each one carrying diagrams of the stars, crooked spirals marking the paths of comets that had already come and gone. On those parchments, careful hands had traced arcs of brilliance, great sweeps of light that had once crossed the night, each leaving behind new stories, new fears, new hopes. Some believed those comets were omens. Others believed they were messages. But here, in this city of sand and starlight, they were something more. They were royal processions in the sky. The people told their children, and their children's children, that the vanished kings, those rulers who once sat on cloud-kissed thrones, those who listened to the language of thunder and held councils with the stars, returned every 100 years in luminous chariots of ice and fire to circle the world they once governed. When the comet came, they said the kings would pass overhead, looking down, surveying all that had changed and all that had been forgotten. To be awake beneath that passage was to be seen by the sky itself. And so, each century, when the calculations were made and the quiet astronomers of the city saw the signs in the shifting patterns of the stars, a kind of sacred expectancy settled over every street and courtyard. On the chosen night, as the first shadows of evening stretched long and thin, the city prepared its last, silent celebration. There were no drums, no loud proclamations, no fires blazing from the towers. Instead, every door was opened and every lamp dimmed. Families stepped into the cool air with shawls drawn lightly around their shoulders, faces turned already to the east, where the sky grew deep and velvety. Torches in the main square were reduced to small, steady flames. Too much light from below, they believed, might drown the glory from above. Children were hushed. Their questions softened into whispers. Their excitement wrapped gently in their mothers' hands. And when the last rim of the sun sank behind the dunes and the first stars pierced through the fading blue, the city slowed and then stilled, streets empty. Merchants closed their stalls, tools were set aside. Even the fountains, by old custom and careful craft, were calmed. Weights and hidden mechanisms quieted the water's movement until it rested in absolute stillness, waiting only to mirror the sky. In that quiet, every eye lifted. Imagine it, an entire city holding its breath. On rooftops, in courtyards, along the open squares where dust had been swept away, they gathered. The old leaned against cool stone, their faces lined with the traces of other nights like this. The young sat cross-legged, backs straight, their eyes wide and unblinking, scanning the arch of heaven. Some clutched small talismans, pieces of crystals, coins with tiny starbursts engraved. Things marked by the moon, they said, for blessing, for courage. In the center of the city stood a tall, slender pillar, rising from the square like a finger pointed upward. Wrapped around it were carvings of spirals and comets, their tails curling gracefully, each one etched with a care so delicate it seemed almost like calligraphy in stone. The tip of the pillar seemed to lean toward the sky as if it too were waiting. And above them all, the heavens spread infinite and silent. They knew, from their scrolls and calculations, from old songs and slow counting, that tonight the royal procession would arrive. The vanished kings, in their burning chariots of ice and dust, would pass once more over their patient city. Time lengthened. Minutes stretched like golden threads. The stars wheeled overhead, sliding quietly along their ancient routes. Somewhere in the distance, a desert wind began to move. Its breath so faint, it barely disturbed the folds of clothing, barely shivered across the still water in the fountains. The people waited. They remembered old descriptions, a brilliance on the edge of vision, a sudden silver wound opened in the dark, a tail of luminous dust dragging slowly across the sky, like a brushstroke of light, a sign that the king still circled the world. Perhaps in some past century, those comets had come right on time. Perhaps they had flared so bright that the city's walls, with their crushed gemstones and polished alabaster, had answered in shimmering chorus, turning every surface into a reflection of celestial fire. Perhaps children of that age still dreamt of it until their last days. None of those witnesses remain. Only the stories, passed forward like a candle flame from hand to hand. And now, on this final night of waiting, their descendants watched the same sky. Hours passed, the stars shifted. The moon moved on its quiet path, climbing, then tipping away. Eyes grew tired, but still they stared upward, searching the edges of perception for any hint of movement, any trace of silver. But the sky remained dark. No brilliant visitor arrived. No tale of ice and dust cut a bright wound through the night. The heavens, for the first time in their remembered history, offered only their ordinary constellations and a silence that seemed suddenly heavier. Beneath the silence, whispers began. Soft at first, like grains of sand slipping down a dune. Perhaps the calculations were wrong, they said. Perhaps the comet had come earlier while clouds veiled its passing. Perhaps it would arrive tomorrow, or the night after, or in some secret hour when no one watched. Somewhere in the square a child began to cry, frightened not by what had happened, but by what had not. The elders consoled as best they could, patting shoulders, straightening shawls, offering words that had comforted them through storms and droughts and uncertainties. But doubt had entered the city like a quiet, persistent wind seeping through every crack. If the kings did not come, had they ever come at all? If no comet crowned the night, had the city been waiting for a story? The next day, life resumed, or tried to. Bread was baked, wells were drawn, market stalls reopened, but a thinness crept into the air, a sense that something essential had quietly shifted. Families began to speak of moving on. Some said the desert was creeping closer, that sand would soon reclaim the outer streets and bury the oldest stones. Others confessed in hushed tones that they no longer felt the sky watching them. Bit by bit, house by house, they departed. Caravans gathered at the city's edge, camels swaying under bundles of woven cloth, rolled mats, bundles of scrolls tied hastily with fraying cords. A few scrolls stayed behind, forgotten in deep chambers. Star charts left on stone shelves. Notes on comets whose tails once seemed bright enough to change the course of lives. Doors closed. Windows were shuttered and then slowly filled with dust. The fountains, without hands to tend them, grew shallow. The carved pillar in the square stood alone, its spiraled comets watching a sky that had stopped answering, or perhaps had never spoken at all. One by one, footsteps faded into the dunes, until there was no one left to wait. Now only the desert remains, and the ghost of a city sleeping beneath its veil. Wind carries sand across the silent stones, filling alleyways and doorways with soft drifts that rise and fall like the rhythm of a slow, endless breath. At night, the crushed gemstones embedded in the wall will still catch starlight. They still glimmer quietly, like tiny eyes that refuse to close. The fountains are dry, but their basins still hold the shape of water, curving inward with the memory of reflected skies. If you were to stand there now, beneath a moon-pale dome of night, you might feel something strange and tender, a sense that the city itself leans upward from its foundations, its towers tilting ever so slightly, as if the stones are still listening for a distant whisper of fire, as if the streets, though empty, are angled toward the heavens, waiting for a streak of silver to cut through the dark. Perhaps one day a comet will come again. Its tail will unfurl across the sky like luminous silk, dragging behind it a long cathedral of light. It will pass over dunes and oceans, mountains and sleeping villages. It may pass over this deserted city as well, light touching abandoned walls, igniting the gemstone dust in a brief, breathless flare. But there will be no faces turned upward, no fountains lying still in expectation, no pillar wrapped in human prayer, only stone, only sand, only the faint echo of a devotion long surrendered to time. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is how it was always meant to be. For some wonders do not need witnesses to be true. Some processions of the sky move in silence, honoring cities, lives, and hopes that have already passed. And some stories, like comets, arc into our world only once in a lifetime before vanishing into darkness again. Perhaps this city was never meant to be found by us, only dreamed of as we drift between waking and sleep. Perhaps the kings still ride their luminous paths, unseen. And perhaps, as your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts begin to soften, you can feel a faint silver thread passing through the night above you. A reminder that there are places and people and entire cities that once waited faithfully for a light that came only for them. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some comets only shine for those who wait in silence. And somewhere beneath drifting sand and starlit sky, the city that waited for comets still leans upward, just a little toward a heaven that may yet remember its name, in the place where the world grows quiet, where roots stretch deep, and the canopy drifts like a sleeping sea overhead. There is said to be a chamber beneath the earth that does not belong only to time. Its entrance is not marked on any map, nor known to any road. It waits within a forest, so old that its leaves seem to remember the footfalls of forgotten eras. If you were wandering there, guided only by curiosity, you might feel the air change first. A hush settles over the forest floor. Birdsong fades into a gentle stillness, as though the trees themselves hold their breath. And then you would see it. Dark trunks bent toward one another, their branches twisted and woven into a natural archway as precise and ceremonial as any temple gate. Beneath that arch, the earth falls away into shadow. The opening is little more than a sigh in the hillside, a crescent of darkness surrounded by moss and shimmering dew. Some believe the trees bow not to conceal the cave, but to honor it, as though the forest knows what lies beyond. Stepping inside feels like crossing a threshold from the realm of the seen into the realm of the whispered. The light from outside does not follow far, but is swallowed gently into the cool stone mouth of the cavern. Lanterns, old ones, their brass frames stained by age, hang from hooks, hammered into the rock so long ago that the metal has softened to the texture of bone. When lit, their flames flutter and stretch, glancing off walls that glitter faintly with mica and veins of quartz. That sparkle, soft and elusive, is the first sign that the cave is more than hollow stone. It is as though the very walls remember starlight from ages past, holding echoes of celestial fires long since vanished from the sky above. It is said that this cavern is the breath of the world, its tunnels the lungs through which the earth inhales night and exhales dawn. The ceilings arch high overhead, then narrow, then open again into chambers that twist and unravel like a path drawn by memory itself. Each corridor curves as though it grew on its own accord, without blueprint, without mortal hand. Yet the further one travels inward, the more evidence appears that someone, a giant or something, once shaped this place with intention. Carved into the rock are spirals so delicate they seem impossible. Not crude chisel marks nor inscriptions worn by water, but lines traced with a hand that understood both stone and meaning. Some spirals rise wide, widening and widening as though opening into infinity. Others coil tightly inward, folding upon themselves like secrets seeking silence. Scholars who have heard rumors of this place have argued for years about the origin of those markings. Some claim that ancient craftsmen worked these walls with tools now lost to rust and oblivion. Others insist that the spirals were not carved, but formed naturally by currents of wind and water moving with such patience that their flow became art. But among the hush of the old forest and the deepening shadows of the cave, another whisper persists. A whisper that says the spirals were traced by kings. Not kings crowned with gold, but kings of breath and cloud, whose power lay not in armies, but in understanding. For there are legends here woven into leaf and loam, into moss and stone, that the vanished kings who once ruled the sky did not govern with command or decree. They ruled through breath, not the breath of lungs or lips, but the breath of wind and breeze and storm. It is said that these kings knew how to listen to the air as it moved. They could hear the murmured plans in the curl of morning gusts and sense rivers shifting courses long before the waters rose. They understood that wind carries more than weather, that it bears memory and warning and invitation. Some tales claim that the kings could shape valleys with exhalation alone, rerouting rivers with nothing more than intention whispered into the current. Others insist that their greatest power was gentler still, the ability to calm storms simply by breathing deeply, as though all the sky's fury answered to their pulse. Such stories stretch the boundary between myth and reverence. Yet the cavern seems built to honor them, or to remember them, or perhaps to house something that still moves unseen. Deeper into the tunnels, the air begins to warm. The stone walls, so cool at the entrance, grow almost tender to the touch. It is as though the cavern has a pulse, soft and steady, rising through the rock. Lantern flame feels brighter here, though the light flickers irregularly, swelling and dimming as if responding to some hidden breath. The spirals on the wall multiply and merge into patterns, clusters that resemble galaxies, or currents of wind frozen mid-motion. One section bears a design that drifts from the wall and onto the floor, as though a gust of air once touched the stone and left its fingerprint. Some say that if you place your palm upon those etchings and breathe slowly, you can feel a hum beneath your skin, a vibration barely perceptible, like a voice speaking beyond hearing. Others warn that lingering too long invites the cave to remember you in return, to weave your breath into its long inhalations and hold you there. If you continue walking, chamber by chamber, the way grows deeper and more still. The sound of your feet echoes faintly, a reminder that air itself is listening. Above, you may hear the faint rustle of the forest canopy, filtered through many layers of stone until it becomes a whisper. You may imagine that the kings themselves walked these corridors, barefoot, unadorned, letting their presence be absorbed by the silent earth. Some believe this was where they shed their crowns, not as objects, but as burdens, returning their power to the world through breath. Others say this chamber was their throne room, a place where no throne was needed, where authority was exchanged not with ritual or witness, but with surrender. Still others murmur that the kings used the cave as a gateway, a thin place between worlds where wind and flesh could trade places. That they came here not to rule, but to release themselves into the realm beyond form. Eventually, you reach the heart of the cave. There is no door marking the transition, no sudden widening of the tunnel. One simply steps into a space so vast, so still, that it feels like stepping into the pause between two heartbeats. The room is cavernous, its roof soaring high above, its walls curving smooth and unbroken, like the inside of a great sleeping lung. But there is nothing here. No throne, no altar, no crown set on a pedestal, no relic to prove the kings ever existed. Only silence. A silence so complete it feels sacred. The air hums with what might be memory, or might be imagination. Your lantern flickers. Shadows ripple across the stone like slow-moving tide. You breathe, quietly, and the cavern seems to breathe with you. For a moment, you might feel utterly weightless, as though you have stepped outside yourself, as though the pool holds not emptiness but possibility. And then the moment passes. When at last you retrace your steps toward the forest above, the air cools again. The spirals fade into dimness. The lantern becomes steady. You reach the entrance just as dawn begins to press a pale glow into the sky beyond the trees. Leaves tremble overhead, their edges gilded by light. The forest wakes slowly, birdsong returning, branches stirring with morning's breath. Behind you, the cave mouth looms black and still, as unreadable as a closed book. And a thought arrives, not loud, not certain, but soft as moss beneath bare feet. Perhaps the kings never held crowns in any earthly sense. Perhaps they were never flesh at all. Perhaps they dissolved into wind and sky and breath so fully that no record remains but the movement of air across mountains and valleys. Perhaps they rule still, not with decree, but with presence, unseen, yet everywhere. And in the hush before sleep, or the moment between waking and dream, you may feel that presence like a gentle gust against your cheek, like a hush that quiets your thoughts, like a whisper that reminds you to breathe. For some powers never needed thrones. Some voices only echo when the world is silent enough to listen. And some gangs once dissolved into wind rule forever in the spaces where memory fades and mystery begins. In forgotten ages, before ink-stained parchment, and before compasses learned to tremble toward the north, there were those who believed that the sky itself held all the maps humankind would ever need. Not with borders, nor measurements, nor names etched in steady hand, but with light. with constellations laid across a velvet vault, like jewels scattered from a celestial crown. And it is into such a night that we wander now. Imagine a sky so dark, so unbroken, that even the softest star seems to burn with the certainty of purpose. No firelight flickers nearby, no village hum threads through the air. Only silence, full and breathing, resting upon the world like a great feathered wing. Above, the firmament glows, not brightly, but completely. A vast, fathomless expanse laced with glittering currents of starlight. It is said that on certain nights, when the world tilts just so, and the wind shifts into a hush, the stars align into patterns too deliberate to be the work of chance. Patterns so intricate that they seem less like decoration and more like direction. Here begins the story of the map drawn on the night itself. Long before sailors trusted the tug of tide and wave, ancient mariners raised their eyes upward and claimed that the sky was not merely a canopy, but a scroll inked in fire and dust. They charted voyages not upon water or sand, but across constellations, trusting above all else that the heavens would not mislead those who learned to listen. Many believed that the vanished kings, those elusive rulers who governed not from thrones, but from realms between breath and starlight, charted their ascent the same way. Whispers tell us that these kings travelled without ships, without horses, without even footsteps pressed into earth. They journeyed along moonlight itself, riding soft beams that slipped like silver rivers through oceanic dark. Some stories speak of vessels woven from light, great sails spun from darkness itself, catching stardust winds that carried them beyond mortal sight. Others say they did not travel at all, that it was the heavens which came to meet them. Our scene shifts now to a lonely tower of stone. No kingdom stands beside it. Only a slope of hillside grass, trembling under the weight of night. In that tower dwells a scholar. No name is carved into its door. No history book records his age or origin. But his presence is felt in the soft scratch of quill, the quiet rustle of parchment, the steady breath that fogs the chilled air. Night after night, he climbs the spiral staircase to a platform open to the sky, lined with simple instruments whose purpose is known only to him. An astrolabe, a shallow bowl of polished bronze, reflecting stars like a still pool reflects moons. Scrolls stained with soot and candlelight. But on this night, the night that matters, he brings nothing at all. Only his eyes, only his wonder, only his trembling fingers. Above him, the constellations shift slowly into forms so distinct that he feels almost dizzy to witness them. 10 stars align, then 20, then 100 more, until the sky becomes a palace of windows into places unseen. He traces them, not on parchment, but in the air, connecting points of light with half-remembered geometry. The patterns emerge gradually, like images rising in mist. A curve that might be a coastline, a cluster that resembles a mountain chain, a scatter of faint embers forming what might be an archipelago, and farther still, lines that no earthly map holds, curving beyond familiar lands into spaces neither land nor sea. He is trembling now, for in this celestial script he senses meaning. Not merely direction, but instruction. A decree laid across the heavens with hands unseen. A memory captured in astral ink. Whispers tell us that the scholar is not the first to stand beneath such a map. Centuries before, others tried to read the stars. Mystics chanted beneath frozen peaks. Monks inscribed circles on desert stone. Navigators steered their ships beyond the reach of coastline and found islands unmarked by mortal knowing. But none deciphered it fully. Some say they were not meant to. Yet tonight, the scholar dares to continue. He draws lines in his mind. He follows the shimmering arc of a constellation that dips toward the horizon, then rises elsewhere, as though bridging distant worlds. Near the zenith, the stars cluster into a spiral, tight and glowing, curling inward like a shell or outward like a galaxy. He recognizes the symbol from stories carved into temple stones and murmured through bedtime lore. The spiral of ascension, the sign of the unnamed kings who ruled without rule, whose crowns lay hidden behind clouds, whose footsteps left no dust. The scholar's breath catches, the meaning unfolds, not like a revelation, but like a tide. Slow, swelling, irresistible. This is not a map of Earth alone. Its curves cross oceans, yes, but they then leap into the sky, bridging the boundary between land and ether with a confidence that feels predestined. What if the kings did not vanish? What if they simply followed this path, ascending along starlit lanes until Earth could no longer claim them? What if sovereignty is not surrendered, but transformed? What if crowns become constellations and kingdoms become wind? He is so close, closer than any scholar, any sailor, any dreamer before him. He reaches out, toward nothing, toward everything. Fingers spread as though he might hold a thread of light itself, and the sky answers, not with brilliance, but with retreat. A single cloud slips across the moon, then another, spreading like ink spilled into water. The stars dim, the spiral dissolves. The shimmering coastlines evaporate as though wiped clean by unseen hand. Within moments, the entire celestial map is gone. Only darkness remains, soft and depthless, as though the heavens themselves have shrugged on a cloak of secrecy. The scholar lowers his hand, and for a moment he stands perfectly still. His heart aches, not with disappointment, but with awe, for he understands what many do not. Some truths are meant to be traced, not held. Some messages are intended only as glimpses, fleeting gifts that slip through fingers before certainty has a chance to harden. Perhaps the kings left their story in the sky only long enough for wonder to bloom. Perhaps the path they walked was not meant for mortal feet. Perhaps maps drawn of the starlight are not for travel, but for imagining. The scholar returns to his chamber at last, descending the spiral stair without lighting a lantern. Behind him, the night settles back into its steady hum. Crickets, wind, leaves brushing roof tiles like fingertips on parchment. The sky, now veiled with drifting cloud, shows nothing of what it revealed. But his heart still bears the imprint of the spiral, the arc, the impossible line. He lies down on his narrow cot, closing his eyes slowly, softly, as though he fears to disturb the memory. And as sleep gathers him, he understands. Perhaps the map was never meant to be committed to scroll or ink. Perhaps it would vanish the moment any hand attempted to claim it. Perhaps the vanished kings rose upward, following a path not drawn but lived. Perhaps the only proof of their journey is felt not seen. And perhaps on the quietest nights, when clouds drift thin and stars burn steady, their story appears again for those willing to lift their gaze. For some voices only echo when the listener is ready. Some maps glow only in darkness, and some truths are meant to be glimpsed, never held, until we too learn to walk along starlight. It is said that in certain places, where the land yields gently to the sea, and the line between earth and water is drawn with a patient hand, the world remembers sounds that no instrument has ever played. On such a shore, far from harbours and lamps, there lies a stretch of sand as pale as worn parchment, glazed at night with silver reflections as the tide breathes in and out. When the moon hangs low and the waves grow quiet, the water there turns to glass. It spreads outward in a smooth, dark sheet that catches every star it can hold. So that sky and sea lean softly into one another and share their light. On nights like these, the wind dims its voice, and even the smallest pebble seems reluctant to shift. Here, at the edge of all that is known, a story has long been told. Fishermen who once worked these waters spoke in hushed tones of a strange occurrence, a secret they carried home in the salt of their eyebrows and the wrinkles of their weathered hands. They said that when the tide slipped as far back as it could, when the sea's body seemed to gather itself into one long, slow inhale, a sound would rise from the emptiness. Not the cry of birds, nor the sigh of wind, nor the usual murmur of waves. A song, faint as the shimmer of distant starlight, delicate as breath on a sleeping cheek, yet unmistakable. It was never loud, never insistent. It threaded through the air like a thin silver ribbon, soft enough to be doubted, beautiful enough to be believed. The song carried no words, no language that any mouth could shape. And yet, all who heard it agreed that it was full of meaning. A yearning, they said, that rose from somewhere beyond the horizon and laid itself gently over their hearts. Even the heaviest of spirits, bent with worry or loss, felt lighter in its wake, as though unburdened by something they had never been able to name. Whispers tell us that the elders of the coastal villages knew this song well. When their hair had turned white as foam on storm-tossed waves, they would sit upon rounded rocks and watch the sea recede, eyes narrowed against the moon's soft glare. They insisted, with the quiet certainty of those who no longer needed to convince anyone, that it was not the sea singing. It was the sky, more precisely, they said, it was the kings of the sky. Those vanished rulers, long since ascended from thrones of stone and ceremonies of earth, had taken up residence in the vast, star-crowned halls above. From there, they sang down through the firmament, their voices traveling along threads of light until they reached the edge of the world and sank into the waiting sea. There, the water became their instrument. Their breath turned to ripples and resonance, and their song lapped gently against the shore. It was their way, the elders believed, of reminding mortals that they had not been abandoned, that the celestial reign continued in ways no chronicle could record. On a certain night, when the moon was high and the world seemed suspended between sleeping and waking, a traveller wandered onto that silvered shore. No one remembers from where he came, or why his feet carried him over dune and dune of cool sand until he reached the water's edge. What is known, or at least softly claimed, is that he was very tired. Tired in the way that goes beyond bone and muscle, beyond the weight of a pack, or the ache of a long journey. He was tired in the deeper sense, where thoughts grow heavy and memory feels like a crowded room. So when he arrived at the shore and saw the sea lying silent before him, ink dark and shining, he sank down upon the sand as though yielding to something older than his weariness. He lay back, arms folded beneath his head, and let the sky fill his vision. Stars blinked overhead, small and steady, their reflections joining them in the water just beyond his feet. Between them all, the night was smooth and deep, a velvet curtain with tiny tears of light. Time loosened its grip. The traveler's breathing slowed. And then, as the tide slipped quietly backward, the song began. At first, it was almost nothing, just a suggestion, a faint thread of tone woven through the hush. Had he moved? Had he stood up or brushed sand from his clothes? He might have missed it entirely. But he was still, his body heavy, his mind drifting. So he heard. The melody was simple, yet impossible to follow. It rose and fell slowly, without rhythm, like the breathing of some great unseen being. There were no verses, no repetitions, no chorus waiting at the end of a phrase. And yet, in its formlessness, there was a profound sense of order, a kind of tide of sound washing faintly through him, gathering up worry and dust and setting them gently aside. Beneath the silence of the night, notes threaded with moonlit calm slipped through his thoughts, softening their edges, blurring their sharp outlines. He felt as though someone, or something, was humming to the horizon, and the horizon was answering. As he listened, the song deepened, not in volume, but in presence. The faint lines of melody seemed to stretch outward, cross the water, toward the unseen distance. His imagination, lightened by fatigue and lulled by the gentle repetition of the sea's quiet breath, began to follow. He saw, in his mind's drifting eye, shapes beneath the surface. Not fish, nor weed, nor rocks. Columns, tall and pale, rising from the ocean floor like the fingers of a drowned king's hand. Colonnades half buried in silt and shadow. Plazas paved with stone, their intricate patterns softened by centuries of moving sand. Stairways that once led down from sunlit palaces, now tumbling into green-blue quiet, each step blurred with sediment and time. He followed the melody further outward, and the ruins gathered themselves into something like a city, sleeping beneath the waves. Some believe that long before our age, there was indeed such a city. Built close to the edge of the sea, then pulled slowly under by patient tides and shifting crust. Others say it never existed in stone at all, but in the minds of those who yearned for a place where heaven and water met. Either way, the traveler saw it clearly. In the spaces that opened between notes, he glimpsed archways whose ceilings followed the same curve as the horizon. He saw plazas where fires once burned, smoke rising to mingle with salty air. Voices lifted in songs long since carried away by wind. And above it all he saw the kings. Not as they might have walked on dry land, but as they moved now in his vision. They strode across the waves as if upon polished stone, their cloaks woven of clouds and dawn light. The fabric moved like mist, caught in a gentle breeze, trailing behind them in so swirling patterns. Where their feet touched the water, little circles of luminescence bloomed and faded, like echoes of stars. They did not speak. They did not raise their hands in blessing or decree. They simply walked, side by side, toward the sleeping ruins. The song, if it was a song, seemed to rise from them and from the sea, and from some unfathomable distance beyond both. The traveller's heart ached with a kind of nameless longing, as though he were homesick for a place he had never seen. Beneath the silence of the physical world, this vision swelled and receded like the tide itself. He lost track of where his body ended and the shoreline began. He felt his thoughts loosening their tether, drifting like bits of driftwood on a gentle current. The kings reached the drowned colonnades. They paused upon the last visible stair, their cloud cloaks catching the faintest blush of unseen light. One turned, seemed to, as though sensing the watcher on the beach. The song narrowed, became for a moment a single held tone, thin as a filament of silver. Then, very softly, almost imperceptibly, it began to fade. Far away, at the edge of the sight, the first suggestion of dawn touched the horizon. Not yet a line, not yet a colour. Just a breathing change in the darkness, a slight lessening of its weight. The song retreated with it, step by step, note by note. The kings grew more transparent, their forms dissolving into mist, into light, into the memory of light. The underwater colonnades blurred and sank from view as shadows folded back over them. The shoreline, with its silver glaze, dimmed. The traveller's eyes fluttered, then closed completely. He exhaled. He let go. The last thread of melody slipped away into the brightening distance. When he woke, the sun was low but present, etching a soft line of gold across the horizon. The sea had returned, covering the place where wet sand had been bare. Gulls called somewhere overhead. The air smelled of salt and light. His body was cool where the dampness had seeped in. His hair was tangled with grains of sand. His footprints, which must have marked his arrival, were gone. The waves, in their endless care, had smoothed them away. He sat up slowly, blinking, heart still heavy with the echo of what he could no longer hear. Had there been a song? Had the kings walked the waves? Had he truly seen submerged ruins and cloud-woven cloaks and circles of light blooming upon the water? Or had it all been the soft conjuring of a mind made porous by sleep? The shore offered no answer, only the steady hush of waves coming and going, as they had for longer than any story had been told. Beneath the silence, however, something remained. Not a clear memory, not a solid image, but a residue of peace. A sense that between the sea and the sky, between the deep and the distant, something loving had brushed briefly against the world. Perhaps the elders were right. Perhaps the kings of the sky still sing through the sea, on certain nights when the tide draws back like a curtain. Perhaps the ruins of a forgotten city sleep just beyond the reach of our vision, their colonnades marked by the moon, and visited only by those carried there in dreams. Or perhaps, as some quietly suggest, the song is the earth itself comforting those who listen, reminding them that they belong to a story larger than any single life. We cannot say. Some truths arrive only as music in the spaces between waves. Some voices only echo when we are very still. And some songs, like the one that woke the horizon, are meant not to be remembered clearly, but to leave us softer, calmer, more willing to close our eyes and drift. As the day moves on and the tide continues its timeless rhythm, the shoreline forgets the weight of one sleeping traveller. But the heart sometimes remembers what the mind cannot hold. Perhaps, on some quiet night of your own, When the world grows hushed and the horizon lies still, you too will hear a faint lullaby rising from nowhere in particular. And you may not know if it is sea breath or sky kings or simply your own soul singing back to the dark. You may only know that it makes you feel a little less alone beneath the endless arch of the heavens. And as sleep draws near, you might understand. Some songs were never meant to be captured, only followed for a little while into the soft shining distance where memory fades and dreaming begins. In forgotten times, long before monuments lost their names, and long before kingdoms dissolved into stories whispered by firelight, there lived a ruler whose reign is now remembered not for armies marched nor banners flown, but for a single artifact born of sky and silence. To begin this tale, let us step into the hush before dawn, where earth and heavens still negotiate the passage of morning. The scene opens on a high and lonely plateau, wrapped in twilight and brushed by the faintest fingers of moonlight. Here, wind curls quietly around weathered stone, and the land stretches outward in gentle slopes and sleeping hills, as though resting from long-forgotten labors. At the plateau's center rises a marble column, smooth, pale, unadorned, standing alone like a finger pointing upward in mute remembrance. Atop it, once lay a crown, not gold, nor silver, nor hammered bronze, but something rarer still, a circlet forged from metal that fell from the night sky. Meteoric iron, cold as emptiness, bright as lightning frozen in stone. This is where our story begins. It is said that the crown arrived from heaven in a blaze of fire. The night sky tore open, a streak of light arcing downward as if hurled by unseen hands. Shepherds watching their flocks saw the star fall and trembled. Some believed the gods had loosed a weapon. Others thought the sky itself had cracked and spilled its secrets into the world. When morning came, and they dared to draw near, they found a crater still smoking. Stones fused into glass, air trembling with heat. At its center lay a lump of metal unlike any the earth had offered before. Dark as storm-forged steel, yet shimmering faintly with hidden sparks that flickered when shadow crossed its surface. From this celestial ore the king ordered a crown to be forged. The smiths who worked it claimed it hummed beneath their hammers, as though resisting shape, as though longing to return to the stars from which it fell. But the king would not be denied. He was a man of unusual temperament, quiet, thin of frame, with eyes that followed clouds more often than the affairs of the court. Ministers fretted as he drifted through gardens at night, face tipped skyward, lips parted as though listening for a voice no one else could hear. Yet despite his distant manner, his kingdom flourished. Fields yielded harvests rich enough to feed twice the population. Rivers flowed clear and predictable. Storms skirted the city walls as though guided by invisible currents. Some credited clever administration. Others whispered that the king was marked by the heavens. But many believed that the crown itself was responsible. For when he first placed it upon his brow, the meteoric metal brightened, not with reflected torchlight, but as though light bloomed from within. It shimmered in shades of silver blue, a spectral glow invisible by day, but unmistakable beneath the moon. Those who stood near him spoke of a faint hum that resonated in the bones, a reminder that the king wore the sky itself on his head. Yet nothing given freely by the heavens comes without cost. As the kingdom prospered, the king's vitality dimmed. His hair, once dark, grew pale in a span of seasons. His skin lost its warmth. His movements slowed. He grew thinner still, like a body being gently erased stroke by stroke. Physicians diagnosed wasting illness. Priests blamed spiritual imbalance. But the elders, those with long memories and quiet voices, said simply, "The sky collects what it gives." For the king had invited heaven to rest upon his brow, and heaven in turn had drawn something from him. He spent his final years not ruling from a throne, but sitting atop a tower open to wind and starlight, gazing upward as though preparing himself for departure. When he died, there was neither pageantry nor the pomp of kingship. His body was laid to rest with gentle care, but the crown was not buried beside him. Instead, it was carried in solemn procession to the marble column at the plateau's center. There, it was placed beneath open sky without roof or guard or cover. The whisper went forth, "Let the heavens reclaim their gift." At first, the crown gleamed brightly beneath sun and moon alike. Travelers climbed the slopes to behold it, a circlet that glowed faintly even under clouded skies. Yet, as months passed, a strange transformation began. The iron, unbroken by fire, water, or time, started to soften. Not melting, not rusting, but dissolving. Tiny grains flaked from its surface, sparkling like silver sand before swirling away in the wind's quiet breath. What rusts leaves stain, what melts leaves residue. But this vanishing left nothing behind. It was as though the crown's substance remembered where it came from and yearned upward. Year after year, grain by glowing grain, it diminished. Villagers came to watch the process, like a ceremony unfolding too slowly to be called ritual. Some claimed that each grain that rose carried a fragment of the king's soul. Others believed the king himself had instructed the metal to follow him into the celestial realm. Most simply stood, silent, awed by the impossible. And one day, without fanfare or sigh, the last mote of meteoric iron lifted from the marble pedestal and vanished into the air. Nothing remained. Nothing, except the column smoothed by years of wind, its top faintly dusted with sparkles too fine to gather. Time passed. Seasons folded into decades. The kingdom dissolved into dust and rumor. Villages dwindled. Roads faded. But the column remained, a pale finger of stone marking where heaven once touched earth. And so, as stories do, the tale of the crown passed from mouth to mouth, softening into myth. Most heard it and dismissed it as fancy, but not everyone. Among the wanderers who passed through ruined cities and silent valleys, there was one who still believed. A pilgrim, though not one sworn to any shrine. He carried no staff, no pack, no banner of creed, only a quiet determination and a heart stirred by whispers that others forgot. The stories led him from marketplace to shepherd's hut, across ridge and river, until he arrived at dawn on the plateau. The wind greeted him with cool fingers. The grass bent politely. The marble column stood before him, lit by low sunlight like a pillar carved from frozen breath. He circled it slowly, looking for any glimmer of star metal left clinging to cracks. But there was none. The surface held only the faintest trace, a sheen that caught at the corner of vision, a promise vanishing the moment one tried to grasp it. With reverence, the pilgrim placed his palm against the stone. It felt cool, smooth, barely tangible, as though time had rubbed away all roughness. He closed his eyes. He felt for lingering magic, for the thrumming presence of star-born iron. There was nothing, only stillness, only air moving softly across the high plateau, only absence. And yet, in that absence he felt something else, a fullness he could not name, a sense that the king was not gone, not lost, not taken, simply ascended, lifted, returned. Not all treasures, he realized, are meant to endure. Some, when their purpose is fulfilled, must scatter like seeds or dissolve like breath. Some leave no trace but the whisper of memory. Some crowns are laid not at the feet of men, but at the feet of the stars. The pilgrim withdrew his hand. He took a breath. Slow, steady, grateful. No throne marked the king's resting place. The carved face stared from stone. No metal relic waited to be polished and displayed. Only a column and the sky above it stretching unbroken into eternity. He turned away, letting the wind smooth the imprint of his steps, just as the crown's dust had lifted. As he walked, he carried with him a thought like a soft ember, that the greatest stories are not always etched in granite or held in vaults. Some drift upward into the realm of wind and cloud, kept safe not by hands but by the very air itself. And if one night you find yourself beneath the stars, gazing upward with a feeling you cannot name, listen closely. In the hush, you may sense what the pilgrim understood. Some rulers choose the sky over eternity carved in stone. Some legacies rise grain by grain until they are indistinguishable from the firmament that birthed them. And some crowns, like some truths, are not meant to rest forever on earth, but to vanish into starlight just when we wish to hold them most. It is said that in a far-off marshland, where waters murmur even when the wind is still, and where reeds sway in patterns known only to themselves, there stands a mystery so patient it has outlasted stories, kingdoms, and all desire to explain it. The marsh is not easy to reach. Those who speak of it say that it lies at the heart of a landscape that seems to rearrange itself. Paths that appear solid but daylight turn liquid under starshine, and ridges that seem to promise footing dissolve into waterlogged soil just when one expects firmness. One travels by sound more than sight. The rustle of cattails, the lap of shallow water, the distant chirrup of frogs who seem always to be asking questions but never answering them. And then, without warning, the world parts. For there, where reeds bend low as if kneeling, rise two monolithic doors. They stand side by side, carved from a single slab of obsidian dark stone. No seam divides them. No hinge gleams in the moonlight. No threshold invites the foot to cross. Just a monumental surface etched with spirals and currents that twist and curl like frozen storm clouds mid-whirl. These are the gates that never opened. Villagers from distant hamlets have long whispered of them with uneven voices. Half reverent, half wary, some say that long ago they were carved by mortal hands under the guidance of something unseen. Others insist that no chisel could shape such stone, that the gates rose from the marsh floor fully formed, like a thought given weight. Still others believe that they fell from the heavens, a fractured wall from a palace of the vanished kings. Whatever their origin, one thing is certain: they do not belong to the world as we know it. And yet, they remain anchored in it, silent witnesses to centuries of mist and moon. It is said that when the moon is small or when the clouds thicken, the gates appear dull, inert, nothing more than stone choked by reeds and time. But when the moon is full, and its pale light spills across the marsh like milk poured from a silver bowl, the gates shimmer. Their swirling patterns catch the light and seem to move, not with speed, but with the suggestion of breath, like designs awakening from sleep. Children swore they saw stars reflected upon them, even when no stars shone overhead. Elders warned that such sight was dangerous, for the gates were believed to open not into rooms or roads, but into realms where stories go when they forget themselves. Realms of vanished kings, those sovereigns who once ruled from cloud-kept thrones and conversed with storms. Realms where entry comes not through force or will, but through some mystery the heart must know before the body follows. Our story now follows a dreamer, not a scholar, not a pilgrim, not a seeker hardened by travel, but a quiet soul whose curiosity pulled him forward more gently than purpose. He had heard of the gates, as many had, but he did not chase them. Instead, they called to him, or so he felt. Night after night, he dreamed of dark stone etched with spirals that pulsed with moonlight. He dreamed of reeds parting like curtains, revealing a path not drawn on maps. He dreamed of still water reflecting a sky that belonged to neither mortal day nor mortal night. Until one dusk, unable to ignore the tug of such visions, he walked. Through thickets, across stones slick with moss, guided only by the flicker of horizon light and an intuition as soft as breath. He reached the marshland just as evening exhaled its last warmth. Fireflies rose to greet him. Small sparks of living flame, hovering in clusters as though waiting. Their glow cast shifting halos on the water's surface and illuminated the path as though the air itself wanted him to continue. Reeds parted quietly beneath the light footsteps of someone who had never before set foot there. Mist curled around his ankles like a cat with secrets in its fur. And then, without announcement, without crescendo tunade, the gates appeared. They rose from the dark marsh not abruptly, but as though they had always been there, simply waiting for the dreamer to notice. He stood before them, breath held loosely in his chest. The gates towered overhead, silent but immense. Up close, their surface revealed patterns upon patterns. Spirals, nested within spirals, currents flowing into whirls and dissolving into shapes that refused to settle. His hand lifted, hesitantly, trembling slightly. Fireflies hovered around him like tiny constellations drawn down to earth. When he touched the stone, it beckoned cold, and it was cold, but with the cold of something alive, not dead. A coolness that seemed to pulse faintly, like the lingering warmth of a heartbeat, just extinguished. Some say he felt a vibration, as if the stone were breathing. Others insist that the sensation was only imagined, a projection of hope onto darkness. He could not be sure. His palm rested there a long moment, long enough for the moon to breach cloud and paint the gates anew. The swirling designs ignited in soft silver sheen. Subtle, but unmistakably animate. And just for a breath, the dreamer thought he saw movement. Not outward, not inward, but depth. As though the stone were not stone at all, but a veil drawn tight across something vast. He leaned in. He whispered a word he did not know he knew. and nothing happened. No seam appeared. No hinge groaned. No air rushed out from an unseen world. The gates did not open. The marsh stood motionless, fireflies drifting in slow suspension like stars caught between beats. Time began to change shape. Minutes stretched thin like spun glass. The dreamer sensed that if he stayed long enough, an hour, a night, a lifetime, the gates might shift. But a second thought followed. Perhaps they already had. Perhaps they opened only in ways that could not be seen. Perhaps entry was granted not to hands but to hearts. And perhaps, just perhaps, he had been allowed to stand as close as any mortal would ever stand. Slowly, as though waking from a half-held breath, the marsh began to stir. Wind unfurled across the reeds, bringing back their whispering voices. The fireflies drifted apart, blinking out into darkness as though called to other tasks. The silver faded from the stone surface. The spirals dimmed into inert carvings. Moonlight thinned, and dawn pressed upward from the east. With it came birdsong, earthy scents, the first colors of day. The dreamer lowered his hand. His palm left no mark, not even warmth. He stepped back, feeling neither triumph nor disappointment, only a curious fullness he could not name. He turned to leave. Behind him, the swamp exhaled, a long sigh of mist rising from water and soil. The vapor drifted lazily across the ground and over the dreamer's footprints, blurring them, erasing them, folding them seamlessly back into the land. By the time he reached the edge of the marsh, no trace of him remained, and the gates stood exactly as they always had, closed, silent, unmoving, yet utterly present. Years later, the dreamer, now older, would describe that night only when asked gently. He never claimed the gates opened. He never claimed visions or voices or revelation. He would only say, something was there. And when pressed further, he added softly, not all doors are meant to be entered. Some villagers believed his experience was confirmation of what they had always suspected, that the gates guarded a realm unseen, and that one day someone worthy would pass through. Others shrugged, unmoved by a story without spectacle. But a few, those who listened with their whole attention, understood something deeper, that the gates may open only to those who do not ask, that their purpose may lie not in passage but in presence, and that mystery itself can be a kind of truth. So the gates remain where the reeds bow and the marsh remembers, untouched by architect or conqueror, unchanged by century or storm. They do not beckon, they do not warn, they simply watch. Perhaps in some hidden hour, they shift just a fraction for those who are not seeking. Perhaps they have already opened for countless dreamers who never felt the threshold pass beneath their feet. Perhaps their realm is found not behind them, but around them, in the breath between moments, in the hush where desire falls quiet. Or perhaps they will never open in the way mortals expect. Perhaps they stand only to remind us that some wonders ask nothing more than to be witnessed. Some voices only echo when we listen without demand. Some mysteries bloom only in the presence of stillness. And some gates, like some truths, never open. Because they need not, for the world beyond them may already be here. It is said that there are places so quiet, so wide, so wrapped in their own unbroken hush, that the sky itself leans down to whisper secrets the earth is too young to understand. Such a place waits far beyond forests and rivers, beyond the reach of market roads or hearth-bound storytellers. A place where winter never loosens its grip, and where the world, in its stillness, feels newly made. Step with me there, now. The night opens on a boundless plain of snow, unbroken as far as sight can reach. The land lies white as blank parchment, its edges swallowed into a horizon so faint it seems the earth dissolves into sky and sky into earth. Above, the constellations burn with winter clarity, sharp, unwavering, crystalline. Each star holds steady, as though pinned in place by unseen hands. In the air, cold settles like a gentle weight, pure and dry, humming with frost. This is a land where silence has its own voice, and where every exhale seems to linger long after it leaves the lungs. Travelers once crossed these plains when necessity demanded it. Herding reindeer, following trade, or fleeing storms rolling like mountains against the wind. Over many lifetimes, their stories gathered, each adding a new shimmer to the mystery. For they swore that on nights like there, when the air grew thin and the world drew inward, the stars spoke. Not in language of words or tone, but in whispers of meaning that brushed the skin without passing through ears. They believed that the heavens called out names, not of mortals, but of kings long vanished, sky kings, those whose sovereignty never weighed the earth with palaces or armies, but rose up like breath into the realm above cloud and storm. And so the plain became a place of pilgrimage, not of many feet, but of a few who hoped only to listen. Whispers tell us that the nomads who crossed this region trusted the stars as others trust maps. They marked the land with cairns, low piles of stones stacked carefully as though balancing weight with meaning. Each cairn was placed where over generations someone felt the faint brush of a name carried down from the winter constellations. Not shouted, not proclaimed, barely even offered, but present, like a hand pressed gently against the heart. Stone by stone they built these small monuments to honor what they could not see. No one knew the king's faces, no one recalled their kingdoms. But the cairns suggested their memory endured in ways that defied the crumbling of chronicles and the erasure of time. The snow dampened all sound, yet the nomads believed that each stone placed whispered gratitude upward, like a sigh released into air cold enough to preserve it forever. It is in this sacred quiet that we find a wanderer. His cloak is thick, but already crusted with frost. His boots leave deep impressions in snow so soft it seems to embrace each step instead of resisting it. He does not hurry, no one hurries here. For haste breaks the spell. His breath blooms in front of him in pale clouds that drift upward, as though eager to meet the stars. Each footfall is muffled into stillness, soundless as snowfall. Above him, winter constellations stretch their silver shapes. Orion's belt sharp and unwavering, the Pleiades clustered like frozen pollen, the wandering arc of a faint comet's tail barely visible to the patient eye. The wanderer does not look down. His gaze remains lifted as though he is following a thread of light only he can see. And perhaps he is. For those who listen deeply know that meaning moves not only along paths of earth, but across ceilings of sky. At the heart of the plain lies something so quiet it can be missed even when one is almost upon it. A circle, but not one built to impress nor to endure the eye of an empire. No towering stones, no monoliths, nothing that casts a long shadow. Instead, a ring of small rocks barely higher than a kneecap, half buried under snowdrift, their surfaces roughened by frost's slow caress. Snow gathers atop them like white caps, light enough to brush off with a glove, yet soft enough that no hand tries. It would be easy to walk past them thinking them merely accidental scatter. But seen properly, seen with patience, they form a pattern, a perfect symmetry that echoes a snowflake's structure, six-fold balance, radia extending with gentle logic, a shape that the wanderer cannot fully appreciate from where he stands. But above, from the perspective of the constellations, the design is unmistakable. A sigil of remembrance, the sky bearing witness to Earth, and Earth, in return, reflecting sky. The wanderer pauses. He kneels upon the snow, not from exhaustion but from instinct. His knees sink lightly, pressing into a surface that yields just enough to cradle him. He listens, not for words, for none are expected, not even for music. That belongs to warmer places. He listens for the feeling that arrives when the world pauses. The wind brushes his cheek, cold and unadorned. It carries no message, yet something deeper begins to murmur within him. It is not sound. It is not thought. It is recognition, not of the kings themselves, whose names have no syllables in human tongues, but of the truth that they existed, that their presence left ripples in time like stones dropped into a lake now frozen. He feels in the very thinness of the air a certainty that the sky remembers them even if no living voice does. Their names, whatever they once were, are inscribed not in books or monuments but in starlight, in the slow drift of constellations, in the arc of a comet that returns every lifetime or two, bringing with it stories no ear can catch, and in circles of stone so modest they feel like whispers written into snow. A serenity settles over him, not comfort exactly, more like alignment, as though something in him finds its place between breath and heartbeat, between cold skin and the shimmer of stars. The hum, if it can be called that, is subtle, less vibration than invitation, a quiet certainty that memory endures beyond the reach of remembrance. Above, the constellations wheel on, impervious to cloud and season. They have carried these names, these souls, for longer than human reckoning, and they will carry them long after this wanderer's footprints have vanished beneath new snow. Time does not erase everything. Sometimes it transfers memory from earth to sky. As the night draws thin, a slow bloom of light begins at the horizon. Dawn arrives, not with blazing color, but with a pale wash of blue and gray soft enough to preserve the dream of night, even as it fades. The stars retreat behind brightening air, their whispers folding inward like wings. The hum, that sense of quiet presence, diminishes with them. The wanderer straightens, his joints stiff from cold, yet strangely light. He does not feel loss, only completion. The cairn circle remains where it always has, half hidden beneath snowfall, modest and unassuming. Wind crosses the plain in long, gentle currents, erasing even his newest tracks. In a moment, there will be no proof he was ever there. But proof is not the point. Memory lives elsewhere. In the shape of the stones, in the pattern they whisper, in the sky that once, for a few patient hours, opened its ledger of names and let a wandering soul believe. And so, the story closes the way all true winter stories should. Softly, quietly, with more wonder than answer. Perhaps the kings walk still among constellations and breath-light winds. Perhaps they are carved into the marrow of the universe. Perhaps their names can only be spoken by the stars themselves. Or perhaps they never needed to be spoken at all. For some truths endure not through what we hear, but through what we feel when the world falls silent enough to let us. And as the snow closes over the wanderer's path, and dawn finishes its slow erasure, the certainty remains, gentle as a last sigh. We do not need to hear a name for it to remain. Some memories never fade. They simply rise. It is said that there are lakes in this world where the surface is not merely water, but a threshold, where the wind is careful, where birds circle wide, and where even the trees lean back from the shore, as though giving space to something older than their roots. On such a lake, our story begins. Night has come gently, not with storms, not with sudden darkness, but with the slow extinguishing of color and edge. The sky above is a deep velvety dusk, not yet fully night, but no longer day. Around the lake, a quiet ring of pine and birch holds vigil. Their trunks rise like slender columns, their branches parting to make room for a single unbroken view of the water. The lake itself lies still, a flat disk of shadowed glass cradled in the hollow of the land. Its surface is so calm that the stars, just beginning their patient bloom overhead, settle into it as easily as seeds into soil. It is said that in forgotten centuries, when people trusted the sky more than they trusted their own memory, there were those who believed this lake did more than reflect. They believed it remembered. They spoke of sky kings, rulers who had once walked the earth, but chose in time to ascend. Not to a place beyond reach, but to a realm mirrored beneath the water's skin. A twin kingdom, they said, built not of stone and mortar, but of quiet and light, visible only when the world around it grew silent enough to blur the line between above and below. Whispers tell us that more than one traveler found their way here on nights like this, drawn by rumor and longing. Tonight, a solitary watcher sits at the end of a weathered dock that stretches a little way into the lake's dark heart. The wood beneath him is faded and smooth, its grain softened by the decades of patient water and wind. He sits cross-legged, hands resting loosely on his knees, cloak gathered close against the chill. He is not here to fish or to cross. He is here to see. Beneath his feet, the dock's last beam touches the water with a gentle, steady weight. Before him, the lake stretches. Flat, unbroken, a perfect mirror for the unfolding night. He gazes down. At first, he sees only the familiar things. The rounded silhouettes of trees at the shoreline's edge, the faint arch of the sky, the first sharp stars pricked into the darkness. But as he watches, as his breathing slows, to match the rhythm of nothing at all, something begins to shift. The sky in the water seems deeper than the sky above. Stars cluster there in delicate galaxies, their light softened by the liquid veil. They do not simply shimmer. They float, as though they are embedded within the depths themselves. The watcher leans forward slightly, elbows upon his knees, eyes steady. It is said that staring too long into a still surface invites the mind to wander into places it does not expect. Tonight, the mind does not wander alone. Beneath the scattered constellations, beneath the gliding ghost of the moon, other shapes emerge. At first, they are faint, the mere suggestion of arches and vertical lines. He blinks, but the forms persist. Out of the shadowed depths rise outlines of towers, pale, slender, too precise to be tricks of water. Minarets, crowned with delicate spires. Domes, faintly luminous, curving like droplets of captured starlight. Walls, terraced and graceful, seeming to rise from a floor of darkness that is not the lake bed, but some other ground altogether. Soft banners unfurl, thin as mist, flowing in currents no wind above can feel. They ripple like tidal silk, weaving slowly through the air of that submerged realm. The watcher's heart tightens, not with fear, but with awe so quiet it feels almost like sorrow. Some believe this is the kingdom of the Sky Kings, reflected not above, but below. They say that when these rulers left the earth, they did not depart entirely. Part of their realm remained here, visible only in reflection. A palace of second sight, a city of echoes, a place where their memory could drift through water and light without being broken by the footsteps of those who might claim it. Scrolls in distant monasteries, brittle with age, ink faded to a dust-soft brown, speak briefly of a realm beneath the mirror. Not a hell, not a paradise, but a library of lives lived fully and then released. The texts do not instruct pilgrims to seek it. They simply record that such a place is, and if one finds it, they say no more. On the dock, the watcher finds his breath has grown shallow. He forces it deeper, slower. In, out. A hush gathers within him to match the hush around him. He does not dare to speak. Words, he feels, would break whatever spell has unfolded here. He leans closer, peering into the dim glowing city resting on the lake's inverted sky. He can see now that the palace walls are veiled with something like ivy. But it is not the leafed vine of earth. It is a trailing growth of light, like strands of captured moonbeams, curling over balconies and cornices. Columns stand in solemn rows, their reflections stretching farther into the deep. Bridges arch between towers in delicate spans that seem almost too fine to bear weight. Everything is quiet. There are no figures moving, no flicker of torches, no banners snapping in dramatic wind. Only stillness. Stillness that feels like holding one's breath in an echoing hall. Beneath the silence, the watcher senses another presence. Not eyes upon him, not a gaze but awareness, as though the city itself knows it is being seen. For a moment, he feels strangely seen in return. Not as a name or a story, but as a brief, bright breath on the long timeline of the world. His thoughts lose themselves in the reflection. He wonders who walked those mirrored halls when they still belonged to Earth. Kings whose crowns were rings of light instead of metal. Queens whose robes were woven of cloud color and dawn. He imagines them standing at high balconies, looking upward to the very stars that now burn beneath this water's surface. Did they foresee their realm's descent? Did they choose it? Or did the world simply shift around them? Whispers tell us that once, long ago, a drought struck the lands nearby. Rivers shrank, well ran shallow, grass turned brittle beneath too much sun. Desperate, villagers came to this lake to plead for rain. They brought offerings, bowls of grain, simple carvings, hand-copied prayers. They laid them at the dock's base and asked the Sky Kings for mercy. The story goes that on a certain night, as they knelt, a wind rose without warning. The lake's surface shivered. then parted. Not wide, not enough for a boat, but just enough to reveal a single stairway descending into light. The villagers drew back, afraid. No one stepped forward, and the opportunity, if it was one, passed. The water closed. Rain came 2 days later. The drought ended, yet some elders whispered that a choice had been made, and that the path below would not be offered so plainly again. Now entry, if such a thing still exists, comes only in glimpses, only in reflections, only in moments when no one is trying to seize it. On the dock, a breath of air moves, gentle, almost imperceptible. Its touch is enough. The lake's glass surface rippled once. A tiny ring spreads outward from the beam's edge, distorting stars and palace alike. The banners of light tatter into streaks. The towers wobble. Domes warp, turning into elongated smudges of brightness. The watcher feels his chest tighten, as though he might reach out and still the disturbance, hold the water smooth for just a heartbeat longer. But the ripples go on, expanding until every shape is blurred beyond recognition. By the time the wind has passed, the reflection has dissolved. There is only the plain sky again, floating whole and undisturbed. The lake has returned to being only water. For a long moment, the watcher does not move. His eyes ache from staring. He closes them and sees still the faint outlines of that inverted city etched against the dark. A part of him longs to see it again, to prove to himself that it was real. Another part knows that trying would only push it further away. Some visions, once chased, vanish for good. He opens his eyes. The lake is calm, its surface once more a simple mirror. And yet, there is a glow, soft, subtle, barely there. Not on the water, but beneath it. A gentle haze of light seems to linger in the depths, not forming shapes, not revealing secrets, just breathing quietly in the dark, as though the submerged kingdom did not vanish, but merely withdrew, as though it still lives, its halls lit by a light that does not depend on being seen. The watcher rises slowly, knees stiff, hands brushing dust and wood grain. He does not feel tricked. He does not feel denied. He feels changed, not by knowledge gained, for he has no new facts to carry home, no measurements, no evidence, but by a widening, as though the world has become, in some invisible way, larger than it was when he first sat down. As though there is now beneath every surface a possibility of another reflection. He walks back along the dock, each board creaking softly under his weight. Behind him, the lake lies still, awake and quiet. The stars above continue their slow, measured drift. No light breaks forth. No voice calls his name. That too feels right. In forgotten corners of the earth, there are stories that never insist on being proved. They are content to exist as reflections, as impressions, as images caught once and then remembered. The kingdom beneath the lake is one of these. Perhaps it belongs to the Sky Kings, their last refuge mirrored in the world they left. Perhaps it is only the mind's way of shaping mystery into towers and arches. Or perhaps it was never meant to be resolved into true or false, only to remind us that not all realms are meant to be entered. Some are meant to be seen briefly, and carried not in maps or stone, but in the soft places within us where wonder lingers. As the watcher's footsteps fade into the forest's edge, the dock remains. The lake remains. The reflection, for now, does not return. But the quiet certainty does. Some truths survive only as reflections, and that is enough. It is said that there was a night when the world realized the heavens had stopped speaking. The moon that evening hung in the sky bright as Pai's polished bone, cold and whole, watching the turning earth with a silence so complete that even the smallest creatures seemed to pause. Clouds, if there were any, kept their distance, hovering at the edges of the horizon like hesitant thoughts. Between moon and land, the air lay clear and thin, a vast glass dome through which every star was sharp and unwavering. For as long as anyone remembered, people had felt a thread running between earth and sky. An unseen cord tied around the wrist of the world, leading upward into constellations and beyond. Kings and shepherds, sailors and scholars, mothers sitting in doorways at night, children staring out from rooftops, all had sensed it in their own way. An unbroken lineage of vanished rulers whose breath stirred winds, whose moods shifted tides, whose dreams brushed the edges of mortal sleep. But on this night, beneath the bone-bright moon, the thread felt thin. It trembled once, and then, very softly, it stilled. In forgotten corners of the earth, there were those who claimed they felt the change as surely as they might feel weather turning. A fisherman on a remote shore stood with his nets in hand and glanced up, confused by a quiet he could not name. A monk in a mountain cell paused mid-prayer, his lips still moving, but his heart wondering why no echo rose within him. A woman walking home along a dusty path lifted her gaze out of habit, to read the clouds, to measure the coming day, and found the sky strangely unfamiliar. Not angry, not kind, simply distant. For generations, omens had been read in the movement of birds, in the color of sunsets, in the way mist clung to valleys. Voices, or what people believed to be voices, had threaded through the wind, tugging at dreams, ruffling thoughts. Torchlit altars had held offerings, not just for gods, but for the great invisible kings who were said to dwell in the spaces between stars, guiding the world with a hand so light that most mistook it for fate. Now the altars stood in the moonlight, their fires dwindling to coal. The wind moved, but it carried no messages. The clouds drifted, but they drew no symbols. The sky in all its beauty had fallen quiet. At first, people waited. The silence felt temporary. A pause before a new hymn. A breath drawn in before another age of signs. Temples remained busy. Priests climbed steps to pour out libations, to raise plumes of fragrant smoke that curled upward like questions. Seers cast lots, studied the scars of lightning-struck trees, leaned over bowls of water to watch stars tremble on the surface. But their visions grew thin. Their words, once wrapped in the confidence that something beyond them was answering, began to sound like echoes speaking only to themselves. In libraries lit by oil lamps, scholars unfurled scrolls and traced ancient accounts with ink-stained fingers. Here were the tales of comets that came as warnings, of storms that spoke names, of kings who climbed mountains and returned with eyes full of light. Here were records of winds that turned armies away, of eclipses that crowned the birth of rulers, of constellations shifting to mark the passing of ages. Now, the margins of those scrolls bore new notes. Small, cramped, uncertain, No recent omens, patterns unchanged. The sky remains still. In valleys and on coasts, life went on. Fields were ploughed, children were born, markets rang with the everyday chorus of barter and chatter. Yet beneath the noise, there lay a quiet disappointment, like a song half remembered and never found. People continued to lift their eyes at dusk out of habit, but slowly, over years, the habit frayed, chins lowered, gazes circled closer to hearth and roof and street. The heavens, once watched as closely as weather, became background, beautiful, occasionally admired, no longer expected to answer. Temples, without frequent petitioners, began to change. Stone steps, once swept daily with careful devotion, grew dusty. Cracks opened between slabs of marble and basalt. Into those cracks fell seeds. Rain followed. Time followed. Green fingers of vines slid out from the shadows. At first, they clung to the edges, unobtrusive, almost polite. But the years encouraged boldness. Soon, leaves unfurled across carved reliefs, covering the faces of gods, the stylized crowns of sky kings, the inscriptions of victories and progenitors. Roots thickened, seeking the coolness within stone. Columns that had once held up domed ceilings found new burdens. Curtains of greenery, nests of birds, the soft weight of moss and lichen. Altars, built to carry flame, filled slowly with soil and leaf fall. Flowers grew where sacrifices had been offered. Grass crept to the edges, spreading softness over hard corners. In cities, once grand observatories lost patronage. The lenses cracked. The brass arms of great instruments tarnished to dull brown. Wind rattled windows in towers where no one remained to chart the night. Scrolls curled in neglected cupboards, ink fading. The great chain of attention between earth and sky thinned and relaxed. And yet, beneath the silence, something remained, a waiting, not a void. Whispers tell us that in the absence of heavenly voices, humans began to hear one another more clearly. Without new omens to interpret, they turned their listening closer to home, to the tone of a neighbor's greeting, to the way a child's laugh could lift an afternoon, to the steady rhythm of the body's own breathing. Some found this change unsettling. The sky had been a place to project fear, hope, longing. Now, there was nowhere to send those feelings, but into the weave of daily life. Others found in the quiet a strange peace. No longer did they scan the edges of clouds for hidden warnings. No longer did they fear that a wandering star might spell doom. They learned instead to read the language of ripening fruit, of healthy soil, of a friend's unspoken need. And yet, the memory of the thread never fully disappeared. In old songs, still hummed absent-mindedly over work, the verses spoke of the kings who once shaped dreams. In carved door frames, worn by hands and weather, tiny crown motifs hid among the patterns. At the edges of markets, storytellers still told of thunder that spoke and comets that crowned kings. The sky had fallen quiet, but the story of its former voice remained. On a hill outside a small village, a child lay awake. The house below was full of sleeping breaths, soft, deep, varied. A kind of earthly chorus. Up here, on the dry grass, he could hear instead the distant rustle of leaves, the occasional flicker of a night insect passing by. And above all, the vast silence of the sky. The moon hung heavy, washing the world in bluish light. Shadows were gentle, edges softened. The stars were less bright under the moon's dominance, but they were there, scattered, patient, like scattered embers on the dark. He had heard the old stories. His grandmother, hands thin but steady, had told them by the hearth while embers glowed and the smell of soup filled the house. She had spoken of nights when the wind carried voices not quite human, when the clouds shaped themselves into crowns and spears and open hands. She had described how people once stopped what they were doing to consult the sky before planting, before traveling, before declaring love or war. Now, she admitted, the sky did not answer in the same way. Still, her eyes had held a glimmer. Just because it is quiet, she had said, does not mean it is empty. The child, remembering this, tilted his head back. He traced imaginary circles around the brightest stars. Here, a crooked line that might be a crown. There, 4 points that could be the corners of a throne. He filled in the spaces with his own stories. Sky kings leaning on railings of cloud and light, watching the earth with a tenderness that did not require speech. Their dreams descending like soft rain into the minds of artists, teachers, farmers, those who listened without knowing why. He wondered if they had truly left or if they had simply stepped further back, letting mortals learn to stand upright on their own. Perhaps, he thought, the silence was a kind of trust. Perhaps when the sky fell quiet, it was not abandoning the world, but inviting it to become something more. He did not have the words for these thoughts. They drifted through him in shapes and feelings, as light as the tickle of night air on his cheeks. But he felt them, deeply. Beneath the silence, the earth continued its slow breathing. In. Dew forming on leaves, soil cooling, roots drawing in the last of the day's warmth. Out. Mists rising from rivers, heat releasing from stone, night creatures stirring into their hidden lives. The sky did not speak. It watched. Or perhaps it listened. For above the child, the constellations, old and familiar, held their positions. They did not rearrange themselves into messages. They did not cast sudden beams of light. But they were there, steady, patient, carrying within their distances the stories of things that burned and died long before any temple stone was carved. The child's eyes grew heavy. The crown shapes among the stars blurred, multiplied, merged. He imagined, in that soft, drifting space between waking and sleep, what it might mean for a mortal to ascend, not in body, not in some blazing departure, but in understanding, to lift one's awareness beyond immediate hunger and fear, to feel the great thread of being that runs through stone and water, leaf and breath, moon and mind, to become in some small way a bridge, like the oaks that root in earth and reach into air. Perhaps, he thought, as sleep finally took him, that was what the kings had done. Perhaps they had moved from ruling the outer world to inhabiting the inner one. Perhaps they had not disappeared at all. They had simply changed where they could be found. When morning came, the child was carried inside, blanket wrapped around him, hair damp with dew. The hill returned to its ordinary duties, holding grass, welcoming shadows, shouldering footsteps. In distant forests, temples continued to crumble under ivy. In forgotten cities, altars sank ever deeper into soil. In quiet villages, people rose to begin another day. The sky, as always, spread above them, blue, bright, unspeaking. And yet, within hearts and minds, small questions continued to flicker. A farmer pausing mid-field to admire a flight of birds he could not name. A scholar setting down a text to stare absently out a high window at a single wandering cloud. A child drawing crowns in the dust without knowing why. The sky had fallen quiet. But in that quiet, there remained a gentle, persistent invitation. To listen, to imagine, to rise inwardly to meet a realm that no longer thundered from above but whispered from within. Perhaps the kings live still, invisible but felt. Or perhaps, some quietly say, the time has come for mortals to learn to ascend in their own way. We are left in a soft, sacred uncertainty, floating between sky and earth's deep breathing, held by a silence that may yet be full of meaning. Some voices only echo when the world is quiet enough to hear them, and some threads never truly break. They simply become too fine to see, stretching between stars and sleeping hearts while the moon, bright as polished bone, keeps its patient watch over us all.